Nintendo!
Don't let a single one get away!
We'll each need to take down about 10.
Stow your fear. It's now or never.
We'll win this. I know we will.
Hey everyone, welcome back with Beano Mac, where today we're gonna have an extra long episode for you here. We're gonna start our World of Light playthrough here, and this is it's gonna be just like Subspace Emissary as far as lengthwise goes, so there's gonna be quite a few episodes of this. This first one's gonna be pretty long though, and I'm just gonna kind of ramble and on this one, and it's mostly just like a video for me, you know, to look back on in the future and stuff like that, more so than anything else. We already got our first win here, folks. But yeah, so I'm just gonna kind of talk about my nostalgia when it comes to this game. This is probably one of the most nostalgic games I've ever played because this was just such a big part of my life for like years. And you know, obviously this is also one of the first major games on the Switch, even though I think it was released at the end of 2018, so it was like about a year and a half after the Switch release. But this was the first one where it was like, well, I should say Odyssey, I think was actually the first one that really kicked it into gear for me with the Switch and made it a special console. But more than anything, it's kind of like when you see people, you know, talk about the N64, the PlayStation 1 and stuff like that. It was kind of like, you know, going to your friend's house and playing that, and you know, it was about the community of the game, not necessarily the console itself, if that makes sense. It just happens to be, you know, that's when they grew up, and that's when, like, the era of, you know, consoles they were in, so that's what brought everybody together. And that's kind of how I feel about this game. Because, like I said, for years, you know, just me and my buddies, we had, like, you know, freaking 20 guys of us just playing Smash at various points, doing 8-player, doing, you know, we had a whole bunch of tournaments, which I never won, of course, but I would always get pretty close to the end. And we weren't like these super, well, a few of them were, but most of us weren't like these super big competitive guys that did all these crazy combos or anything like that. But it was just, you know, a bunch of casual players for the most part, just having fun and, you know, gathering and finding a reason to kind of gather and play these games together and stuff like that. I mean, this is kind of like, to me, the Smash Ultimate was like the ultimate multiplayer game, you know, between the tournaments and between, you know, 8-player Smash and such. And the Switch is probably, as I'm older now, and I don't have like a doomer mindset or anything like that, the things aren't going to ever be as good, but it's kind of like the saying of, I think it goes something like, you don't know that you're living in the best times of your life. And I don't know if that's the case, you know. I mean, 26 is all I am, and you know, I've only lived like a fifth of my life. So I mean, there's always going to be, you know, some new challenges, crazy things that's going to happen in the future, unless if I get hit by a car or something tomorrow. But it's not something I put on my planner, so it's just, you know, that was when, you know, my friends group was the biggest, and, you know, that was around the time everybody was going to college, so there was responsibility, but there wasn't real world responsibilities, you know, bills and past, you know, like your phone bill and maybe a credit card bill, and, you know, some student loans that, you know, some of the people in that group are probably still fighting to this day, unfortunately. But it was just kind of, you know, it's like I said, like the N64, you know, and PS2, a lot of people look back on it as like the innocent era because it's still kind of the childhood thing. And for us, it was after high school, and, you know, we had all the freedom and stuff. Okay, this is getting really fucking annoying. But, like, we had, you know, the freedom to kind of do what we wanted, and I guess we just chose to sit around and play Smash Bros, you know, almost, you know, at least 2 to 3 times a week and stuff like that. And, you know, there's a few other Switch titles that really mean a lot to me. Odyssey, it's one that I can't really go back to. It's just not as, it's one of those games, unfortunately. There's games that you can replay over and over and over again, and obviously it's subjective. But for me, it was like, there's nothing that's going to recapture that first magical experience. I'm sure it's kind of like what a lot of people felt when they first played Super Mario 64, because Odyssey was like my first real big, you know, 3D Mario game, and one that I really was able to get invested in. And a lot of the Switch for me too was my brother was always a big Switch guy. You know, like after the Wii U, we didn't really play too much. Like I wasn't big into the Wii U era at all, which is partially why I'm kind of skipping from Brawl straight to Ultimate. I just never really played Wii U that often, and so it just doesn't mean too much to me. And like also, I'm just not a fan of like the single player modes, but I'll talk about that more in like, you know, when I do classic mode with more characters and stuff. But for me, like once again, like my brother kind of got out of gaming for a while during the 3D, not the 3D, the Wii U era. You know, I think he actually was pretty big into the 3DS, and you know, I was always jealous because like that was right before the era I was ever able to get a job. I was just too young, and I was always interested in the Fire Emblem games. Eventually I played Three Houses and Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn and stuff like that, which I will play on the channel, but it was, you know, I was always jealous to see him play that and stuff like that. And even, you know, he was never like an Xbox or PlayStation guy, and I've never been a big one of that either. I love the PS2 and stuff like that, but like all the big titles you would think people would play, like Metal Gear Solids or, you know, any of the PlayStation exclusives like Sly Cooper or Crash Bandicoot. I'm going pretty old school there on the PS2, but you get the idea. Just, I don't even know what other freaking PlayStation exclusives there are today. God of War, I'm not a big fan of. It's not bad, it's just not for me. And then Xbox, you know, it was kind of just, for me, it was a means to an end. It didn't matter what console it was was just, alright, I want to play the wrestling games and, you know, whatever Resident Evil and Mortal Kombat games come out. But the Nintendo, even to this day, I love the fact, you know, they're kind of like douchebags and a scummy corporation and stuff like that. That's just how everything is, though. Nobody's special in that regard, but I always loved, you know, games like this. You would never find Smash Bros. On any other console. You would never find, you know, Mario or Zelda, F-Zero, that hasn't been around for like over 20 years. Get the idea, you know, Fire Emblem, stuff like that. So that's always, you know, it was always kind of interesting to see, okay, what's Nintendo cooking up here? And during the Wii U era, I think most of us can say they were not cooking at all. You know, they didn't even turn the stove on. I don't even think, other than Smash for Wii U, I don't really think there was any other game that I had even the slightest inkling of wanting to play. And maybe you could say Breath of the Wild, but like, I kind of got the Switch for that anyway. It just seemed like it was going to be better. But yeah, there was just the hype surrounding that, because my brother, he was like, you know, saying, hey, the Switch is now, and it was just a line that like we meme in our freaking friend group now, it's a console for the hardcore gamer. You know, again, you know, after the disaster of the Wii U that was trying to appeal to kids and stuff like that, the Switch was trying to appeal to adults, and you know, you can see that sentiment echo throughout, you know, a lot of you know, popular Nintendo YouTubers and how they talk about the content and why they think the Switch was so successful, and I 100% agree. And, you know, there was obviously the lineup of, like, really crazy-looking games. There was Breath of the Wild. Mario Odyssey hadn't been released. We all knew at some point a Smash was coming, and, you know, when we seen the trailer and it was like, everybody is here, and, you know, almost all the stages. I mean, come on, this literally is the ultimate Smash game, you know? The only thing it's missing, unfortunately, is trophies, which, I mean, I guess we at least get the spirit mode out of it, you know, with the spirits. I think they're mostly lame, but that's that, you know, because I grew up with the trophies, and for me, that was like that was the reason why I grinded the single player content back in the day and played as literally everybody and wanted to get all the trophies, do all-star with everybody to get the final Smash or alternate color option trophies and stuff like that. That was kind of my whole purpose for that, was the trophies, and it was just so cool to read those and see, you know, just get the little description of like a bunch of games you haven't played, or like characters in like upcoming games, sometimes that didn't even get released yet. Like I think there's an Almar trophy in Melee to kind of like hype up the release of like Pikmin and stuff like that just wasn't out there yet. I think they even like, in Brawl, I think there's like a trophy that's talking about like a Sonic game that hadn't been released yet. I don't know if it was any good or not, but like they just had one or two trophies that were like that. You know, it helps you learn about the really obscure characters that nobody would ever even know about otherwise. You know, just get a quick description and think, oh man, that's kind of cool, maybe I could check out this game. Obviously, they were never really available, unless if you got the original console, but you know, there's emulators now, so. But that said, other than the trophy things, I say this is 100% the ultimate Smash game, and it really makes you think, okay, how are they going to ever improve this if they can't have every single character again? And I mean, I think the major one is, as much as I like World of Light and Subspace Emissary 2, I feel like the biggest thing that they could do to, if they, you know, to separate this new title, if they come out with one, which they got. I mean, this is one of the biggest selling franchises on Nintendo in general, so they're definitely gonna have another Smash game, unless if we just get Super Smash Bros. Ultimate Deluxe or something for Switch 2. I don't know yet. We'll just have to see what happens, but I do think that the major thing they could do to kind of separate it from the past games is they can have like a fully voiceover kind of, you know, story mode and stuff like that. And, you know, we see more iconic locations, you know, like the Mushroom Kingdom. We go to, you know, Hyrule. We go to you know, the Lilat system. You get the idea. Just all the major locations in these Nintendo games, and we have full voice, you know, cutscenes and stuff like that. I mean, I think in Brawl, I think I said it before in my Brawl videos, but like Sakurai was pissed off because all of the cutscenes and stuff like that got leaked. I think it was 2 weeks before the game even released, and I can definitely understand that frustration. You know, you put all this effort and hard work into this, you know, big story game and stuff like that, and then some douchebag just takes it and leaks it, you know, before the game even releases, or, you know, although I think at the same time for him to kind of just say, well, I'm not doing that ever again. Once again, I can understand the frustration, but it's also kind of lame in a lot of ways. I think that was kind of what also made it to where I wasn't too interested in Smash for Wii U, is like they didn't really have that solo player adventure mode. Like even something like Melee would have been pretty cool, but they didn't really have anything like that. And then Ultimate, like World of Light, like other than that opening cutscene, I think like 1 or 2, they're just, I don't even think there's like any sort of dialogue. It's just kind of showing you like as a means to an end kind of progression thing. There's not really any cutscenes here, and you know, Sakurai said that the cutscenes are a reward for the player playing the game, and I think he also, it could be wrong, but I feel like he also overestimated how many people probably would have seen all those cutscenes that were leaked at the time. Because, I mean, this was like, what, 2008? You know, early internet stuff, you know, I mean, YouTube wasn't even a big thing at that time yet. It was just starting out, so I don't know how many people actually really saw that, but once again, I can understand the frustration of where he's coming from. It just thinks that because of that, you know, we're not going to get any sort of big story mode from him, more than likely. Oh, wow, that was pretty close. I thought I almost just lost there. This is always a pretty cool stage, how you can go back and forth. I was always the best at this one because I could use it to my advantage. But, yeah, I mean, I don't even remember what I was talking about. But yeah, I think that's, like I said, and if they had a new Smash game, that would be kind of the thing to separate it. That's what I was talking about. And going back to the Switch stuff and, you know, growing up with it, you know, we kind of had, this is going to be the very personal part. It's not like anything like, you know, crazy or anything like that, but I'm just talking about like my friends' groups and how eventually it all kind of started to branch off and some things that happened around this time period. So, right before it came out, I had a few friends groups, and here I even have my, I came up with a fake name list for the people to describe them, just, you know, to protect identities and stuff like that if I had to. So there were a few friends groups, like I said, friend groups, god damn, I gotta say that correctly, that I had, and I'd say there was about 3 of them, and I was kind of personally connected with all of them. So the first one, that's probably the least important one, honestly, in this group, is my brother. And I'm just gonna, I have a few brothers, but he's like the main one that relates to this story in particular. So, yeah, I'm just gonna refer to him as Topher. And another one that's he's from that friends group with my brother that I've known for like years, since even when I was a kid. And we didn't really get, I wouldn't even say we're exactly close, but I'd say we are definitely, you know, the best of friends we have been in a very long time. You know, the majority of our time hanging out and stuff like that together, so I'm gonna refer to him as Buddy. And with their groups, obviously that was just my brother, so, you know, he was the one who actually convinced me, like, hey, get the Switch, it's for the hardcore gamer, and all that, you know, stuff like that. And he was the one hyping me up about all these new games that are going to come out and stuff like that, and the magic of the Switch system. And at the end of the day, when you really just kind of look at things objectively, I think the Switch is just kind of like the Wii U again, but, you know, 10 times better. It was marketed better. You could have the Joy-Cons. You didn't have to look at the gamepad. It was not forced, in which you had to use, you know, take the dock out and stuff like that. It was an accessory. It was something you could do if you wanted to, or you could play the games on the big screen. And so, like, the Wii U was kind of like the Switch prototype when you really think about all the features and stuff that it had. But anyway, he talked me into this, and he would be, you know, him and Buddy were, you know, they were involved in a lot of tournaments. They even hosted one. In fact, they even hosted one where there were like these tacky plastic Switch medals and stuff like that, you know, gold, silver, and bronze. I actually got the bronze. Very proud of myself. Still have it hanging on my wall. I'm looking at it right now, you know, just as a memory of not only that tournament, but I mean, it's the closest thing to an award I've ever gotten, which is sad. But hey, I mean, I've never put too much effort in the important things, which I don't know. I was always a pretty good hard worker, but anyway, moving on. There's also the second group. We're gonna call it the. I'm gonna just refer to him as his nickname. And, you know, he wasn't a fan of, but I'm gonna refer to him as Dick Calkins. See, like, I got, like, still that immaturity in me, and, I think it's also a good nickname because that's kind of what our group was at the time. I was kind of embarrassed to kind of show them around other people because, you know, the whole thing with us was we were just kind of like jackasses. We did a lot of stupid stuff. To entertain ourselves, we would just say the most depraved, edgelord kind of stupid crap. You know, it wasn't even jokes. It was just like, oh man, this guy died. You know, isn't that funny? Ha ha, tee hee. You know, just lame teenager stuff. And you know, like somebody at my work died one time, so I was joking, oh, you know, I'm gonna get a promotion now at work. You know, just trying to say the most depraved, edgy stuff. Just to get, you know, it wasn't even jokes. It was just like, hey, you know, like that was kind of the thing that made us laugh, right? And we didn't really wreck the town or anything like that, but also, you know, being teenagers, we didn't care for too much, you know, about personal property or anything like that. And we were just assholes. I mean, that was just plain and simple what it was. And this third group was, you know, a childhood friend I met. He says 4th grade, and I'm sure we were in the same class. I don't think we were actually friends until 5th grade because I vividly remember someone that was only in 5th grade when we first started actually talking to each other. We actually bonded over Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe, oddly enough. You know, we were kids. We didn't know how terrible it was going to be. He thought it was like the greatest thing ever because he was a comic book fan. Still is, but you know, I was trying to, you know, I had the vast knowledge of Mortal Kombat. Apparently, I just lied to him all the time about stupid stuff. Like, I told him Reptile was a Tarkatan, which is not the case at all. That's something he brings up to this day. And I told him in, like, Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks, I spread my own, like, recess myth thing, you know, the kids did. So I said that in, like, the first level in Goro's Lair on Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks, if you beat all the Onis or something like that, eventually Draman, who is another Oni in the character that's very, you know, he's a very obscure character. Eventually, if you beat them all, and I think do like a fatality or something on them all or something like that, Draman would appear and you would fight him in like the spot in Goro's Lair. And you know, that's another thing he always like holds against me. And apparently he did it and actually tried it and he couldn't figure it out. And he like gave me some like false fake thing too, and I can't even remember what it was. He could probably fill me in on it, but like I never actually told him anyway, but like I knew it was kind of like bullshit. I didn't do it, but like I knew like he would feel validated if, well, it would have kept going on and on until I said I did it, because he would have wanted to get revenge on me for the drama and stuff. But on top of that, I mean, I just kind of said like, hey, yeah, I did it, you know, what the heck are you doing, man, come on, you know, just to kind of like give him that satisfaction and stuff. But, you know, friends for a long time. His name is Raquel. And, you know, we used to hang out with some other buddies at this place, you know, we call the Gardens. It was like an apartment complex and stuff like that. And, sorry, I gotta move my cat out of the way. But, we used to hang out for a long time. He used to hang out with his brother, and there was another guy that I met there at the apartments. That was like, you know, their friend as well. We're just gonna call him Dustin. And, you know, he would also be a part of like the Smash tournaments later on, but, you know, eventually it wasn't, we had like super extremely protective moms, me and, you know, Raquel. So like we just barely ever got to do anything, you know, in middle school or anything like that. Like he wasn't even allowed on field trips in school because she was worried something was gonna happen to him. So mine pretty much, and it is kind of like a cruel thing to say this, but like this is how I felt growing up, was like I kind of felt like I was treated like a massive idiot. Like my older brother Topher, you know, he got to, I think it just came from like rebellion and, you know, having the balls to go out and just not really care what she said. But, you know, he had all these huge friends groups, and, you know, when he was in elementary school, he was going over to friends' houses from far away and going to the local schools to play, you know, football and on their stadiums and stuff like that, and getting out and stuff like that, where I was always kind of trapped in the house despite having friends at school. And, you know, being able to live right next to my friend Raquel was really awesome. It was like a 5-minute walk. And, but like even then, like my mom was like, hey, you know, there's reminders like, hey, you know, make sure you be careful crossing the street and stuff like that. And don't go out here, don't do that, yada yada. And like there was just so many times that, you know, like I just kind of like, even my dad, like I remember one time he was convinced that I was walking in the middle of the road whenever I walked back home from work and to work and stuff like that. So he actually bought me like those really crazy like reflective yellow like jackets that like construction workers would wear and everything like that. Just, you know, that made me seem like I was a massive idiot and stuff like that, and that I couldn't even be trusted to walk down the street or anything like that. I always frame it as like, oh no, it's everybody else we're worried about. Yeah, horse shit. But finally, eventually in high school was I moved in with my dad, and it was really cool because for the first time in my life, we had an actually clean house. We had a lot of cats when I lived with my mom, and I won't go into details, but they definitely tore up the place. So it was not the kind of place you wanted to bring your friends in, and I was a huge slob because it was just a normal part of my environment at the time, you know, growing up. And then when I moved out with my dad, it definitely took me a while to kind of get clean and stuff like that, but, you know, at the end of the day, it was a fresh slate. You know, we didn't have any cats, and I got my own room, which was really cool. It was a big, open, spacious room, and then eventually I even got, like, across, you know, right next to my room, we eventually got a game room, which is awesome. So, I mean, my dad was really cool with that stuff, and even before then, we were able to play in the basement downstairs, which was, like, finished and was awesome, and then some asshole friend of his eventually took it over, and you know, that's a whole nother story, but I'm not going to really tell that because it's not really relating to me. But it was for the first time I was able to really go out and, you know, have a friends group and hang outside. And we lived near like a plaza, so we could go to Walmart, we could go get food whenever we wanted. It was like a 10-minute walk. And I was able to also host, you know, the other group, the Dick Calkins gang. The Dick Calkins gang. And they were able to come out and hang out and everything like that. And, you know, we even played games that they had never played. You know, that's when we started getting into Mario Party a lot too, before, you know, the Smash Ultimate came out. That was a big multiplayer game. 6 is my favorite. But we also played a healthy amount of 7, which is really close to 6, in my opinion, on the tier list. So, but it was just really liberating being able to finally kind of get out and, you know, be able to hang out with people, go to places, you know, that weren't just 5 minutes away from my house, and hang out with friends and have more trust when it came to that kind of stuff. And I lived at, you know, I worked at an Arby's right next to my house, so that was really cool. Probably one of, if not my favorite jobs. And, you know, it was a new feeling of freedom in my life at that time, and it just coincidentally came around the time that the Switch came out. And I remember my buddies, you know, my brother Topher and, you know, my buddy Raquel, who I would also just point out is kind of like my best friend at this point in life by far. You know, they just kept they pretty much got me to get the Switch early on than I would have, because they just kept like saying, "Oh, you're not gonna buy it, man. Come on. Stop telling us about how you're gonna buy the Switch when you know you're not gonna," and all this other stuff. And I was gonna wait until like Smash came out, but I bought it a little bit earlier and stuff like that, and just to kind of prove them wrong. Like, hey, yeah, see, you know. And it was a good decision, honestly, even if it was made out of pettiness and spite, because honestly, I eventually played Mario Odyssey and stuff like that, and I had a lot of fun with other games on the console, and it was a really good experience, especially right at the beginning. You know, everything was fresh and new, and you know, just seeing an HD. Even though they had Wii U, I think we just used the color cords or something like that. So I mean, having a just blatant, total HDMI kind of console, to me was like, whoa, this is mind blowing. This is crazy. You know, so it was really awesome. You know, just experiencing a whole lot of new with this console. And the one I had before that also, which is like the Xbox 360, I was always behind on the times when it came to consoles after the PS2 era. But moving on, once I got the Switch, you know, eventually we started kind of hanging out. You know, eventually there was a little bit of a divide in the group, though. So there was the Dick Calkins gang, and in that gang we had another buddy named Leo. And me and Leo, we were kind of like a mix of the two groups. You know, we'll go with the Ray Cal guys and the Dick Calkins gang. So me and Leo, we were good buddies, and we kind of intermingled between both groups. And the thing with that is it was all fine and dandy at first. However, some problems began to arise, and eventually the Dick Calkins gang, despite the fact there was like 10 of those guys in the gang, they just kind of got jealous for whatever reason. And they wouldn't say it that, you know, they kind of like said, "Oh, you guys are butt buddies with, you know, the Ray Cal guys," and all this sort of stuff. And, you know, it's kind of and the thing is, there was a little bit of merit there, because it was me, Ray Cal, Leo, and then our last buddy who, let me see, he's referred to as the Clam, which was just his nickname. And me, Ray Cal, Leo, and the Clam, we would always kind of gather up and play Mario Party, and like the fourth person, like let's say the Clam couldn't play, you know, the fourth person was someone interchangeable with the Dick Calkins gang. And you know, that was kind of a lot of that's how it was a lot of the time when it came to you know, hanging out at my house in particular. And here's the thing, they never really communicated that with us, though. You know, and once again, I didn't really think of that. Like, hey, I'm kind of, even though we hung out still outside of it quite a bit, I never really thought to myself, oh man, I'm neglecting, you know, the Dick Calkins gang, because we still, you know, seeing each other in school all the time. And I always asked them, like, hey, do you want to play Mario Party, this or that? And eventually they kind of stopped saying yes, because, you know, they made up some stupid excuse saying, well, you guys play it so much that, you know, we just don't even want to play it anymore. And it wasn't like, oh, hey, like, you know, we're sick of the game. It was just like, oh, you guys are making the game lame. You know, like a stupid petty reason, you know, type stuff. And eventually there was just a thing where they were planning to go to like the big mall in our area, and they were purposely like trying to, you know, goad us into asking like, hey, what's going on, man? Like, what is this thing you guys keep whispering about near us? And smiling, and then they just kept, oh no, well, don't worry about it. And eventually, you know, Dick Calkins eventually, you know, told us and said, hey, we're gonna go to the mall, and we're planning this big trip, but you guys, we feel like we were neglected, and, you know, you haven't included us on anything, which was yes and no. Like I said, the fourth person in Mario Party was always interchangeable, but we didn't do a big group thing, you know, like we had, like I said, like 10 people, really more like 8 people in the Dick Calkins gang. So to me, it was always kind of this perspective of, well, I'm always hanging out with these guys anyway, and, you know, it's a 4-player game. There's not really any 8-player games we can do or anything like that. And to them, they were like, well, we can still watch movies, we can do this, you know, take turns playing this game and all this other stuff. And I made it up to them. You know, we played some WarioWare Inc., which was, you know, the GameCube. That's the only one I really liked, but that was pretty awesome. And, you know, I was having a lot of fun hanging out with them, and we did some movie nights with, like, the old Scooby-Doo movies that were, like, straight to DVD, like Zombie Island. We all watched, you know, Witches, Ghosts, Alien Invaders, all that stuff eventually, and we even, because it was just like, we even watched the stupid WWE Scooby-Doo mix. I can't remember what it's called. It's like the WWE Scooby-Doo movie and stuff like that, you know, for the memes and stuff. Not as bad as I remember, but it was really just kind of weird and goofy, especially seeing the WWE guys and, you know, as an animated form and hanging out with Scooby-Doo was definitely weird. But an interesting movie, I'll give it that. Probably not something I'd watch over again, but it was pretty funny, and it was fun while we were watching it. But eventually we were doing more group things with them, and it seemed like everything was going good for a while. And for the longest time, though, they still kept isolating us, me and Leo, into like the Raquel gang, and they, you know, kept making, like, saying like how we were all in relationships, and, you know, how we were all butt buddies and yada yada. Even though we definitely made an effort to kind of hang out with everybody else, it was just kind of like, alright, you know, I don't really understand what the deal is. And me and Leo at the time were like, hey, you know, no big deal, but they are acting really weird about this. And eventually, you know, we got Smash, and we had a lot of cool tournaments, you know. And, you know, the first day we got Smash, I think I got it like at night. I forget when it came out, but it was like really late at night. And I told him, alright, well, I'm gonna, you know, I got this now, so I'm gonna play this, and I'm gonna unlock everybody, so that way when you guys come tomorrow, you know, I'll have everybody unlocked. And I wasn't even close. I think I got like 40 people before I just had to pass out at like 3 in the morning. Because I also knew, like, okay, there's no way I'm gonna be able to get everybody with this. And, you know, I was going through classic mode trying to unlock everybody, because every time you beat someone's classic mode, like a new character, like, you'd fight and be able to unlock the next character. And, you know, Smash Ultimate, I think, I can't remember the exact number, I think it was 107 people they had on, like, the base roster, if I remember correctly. So yeah, so there was, like, I don't know if that's with DLC or not, but either way, you guys get the point. It was like a massive roster, gigantic. And so, like, playing like classic mode with everybody just was not gonna cut it. So, you know, the next day, me and my buddies, you know, we kept just grinding the game, and we found out, like, early hack is if you had played versus mode, every single time, like, after the first fight, you get to fight and unlock somebody. And then, like, then it was like 5, and then 10, stuff like that. But we figured out, like, hey, if we play like a 2-player match, the one guy just instantly kills himself, we can have, you know, a fight with the guy after, like, the one battle and unlock him. And then, you know, when we're done with that, we can just restart the console and then do it over and over and over and over again. And, you know, that was the quickest way. Just keep resetting the console, do the one fight, and then take them out. And there was a few people I had trouble with. The biggest one I remember was Cloud, for some reason. No matter who I played as, he was just kicking my butt. And he just seemed so fast and stuff like that. So I don't even think I beat him. I think it was actually my buddy Raquel who finally beat him and stuff like that. I think he even did it on his first try, which was, you know, just even extra embarrassing. But eventually we unlocked all the characters and stuff like that. And, you know, I think it was like one of the few things I ever bought. I think it's the only thing I've ever bought, like, on day one, DLC type stuff, was in Smash Ultimate. Everything else, it was like, alright, I played this game, I'm still wanting more, so, you know, like, 3 houses, that's why I bought the Ash and Wolves DLC. Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 3 Remake, it was like, alright, I want to buy these DLCs because I've already, you know, pretty much almost platinum these games. You know, let's have all the crazy, funny, cool weapons and stuff like that in here. You know, that'll be a good time to add more, you know, just off the walls, batshit insanity to these games and stuff like that. So Smash was the only one. It was because it already had a proven track record for me throughout my whole life, obviously. So, you know, I think we got the Piranha Plant right away, and, you know, eventually we would start getting all the characters as they were drip feeding it to us. You know, I think it was like, what, like every 2 or 3 months. You know, characters will get released and stuff like that. So it was a pretty fun, awesome time, you know, and the game kept growing as we were growing, as you could say. Not to sound cheesy, but You know, we had a lot of tournaments. I won the first tournament, and it was like an items on like tournament stuff like that. Called it the hardcore rules, and you know they kept just saying, "Oh, I only won because of items." And, you know, that's just classic like you know, excuses type deal. And like for me growing up, we didn't have the competitive rule set, right? Like not having items on, doing only stock. Like we would do stock, but we would also do time battles, you know, for 10 minutes. That was like growing up with, you know, my brother Topher and his buddies and stuff like that. You know, that was just the norm, right? 4-player smashes, time battles, 10 minutes, and you know, we would change it up with stock every now and then, but we would always have all the items on, and that's just the way we played. We were as casual as you could possibly get when it came to Smash. So this was all new stuff to me when I was in a group. You know, the Dick Hawkins gang, they wanted, you know, just no weapons, only like 3 to 5 stock at most kind of battles and stuff. And I didn't really mind it because it was just new, it was exciting. It added a new extra layer of the game, so no issues there. And it's kind of the main thing we still do, just because of like we've done it for like years and years and years and years. Boy, that was pretty rough. I thought I was gonna die for sure there, but anyway, so you know, it kind of just this game itself added that layer of, you know, freshness to it that we hadn't played in a while when it came to Smash and stuff. And this was really the game, I think, too, where, you know, even though we played it a lot in the past, my buddy Raquel and the Clam, it definitely took them a long time to kind of get into the games and be, you know, a lot better, you know, kind of get up to my level. And to this day, I mean, I'd argue, you know, they're just vastly better than me, especially the Clam, because he would eventually embrace the kind of competitive culture and really look up how to do certain things and how the game is and how to be the best at it. And you know, he's pretty much eventually won all the tournaments you know, you could do, you know, that we had, you know, in the later years and stuff like that, because the Clam was just that good. He was consistently good. He was usually won by a lot too, you know, like an extra stock or something like that. He was just that good. And he learned from another competitive guy in our group, Trisket. And you know, they were kind of like the 2 top guys of our group, along with, you know, a later friend that we would get, which is well referred to as the Fresh Prince, but he'll be, you know, talked about more later on. And so once that started to happen, we also noticed, you know, because we were playing this game often, like all the time and stuff like that, and it was a good time, but we also started to notice one of our buddies, you know, me and Raquel and the Clan were noticing Leo was kind of distancing himself a little bit. And to me, it wasn't a big deal because he always had the reputation of, I guess you could say, ghosting the groups, right? You know, he just would get in these periods of, I don't want to, you know, do anything right now. I don't want to hang out with anybody. So he'd make up some tacky excuse. He wouldn't just outright say like, hey, I don't feel like hanging out today. It was always something like, I remember one time he even said he was puking up blood, and you know, we even asked his mom, and she said that was not the case. But, you know, like, just weird, crazy stuff. And it was interesting because me and Leo, he doesn't remember it, and I don't know if it's because if it was like he just really didn't remember it or he felt bad, but like he had like some issues, I guess, in middle school and stuff like that. And, you know, he was kind of like the tough guy, I guess, or wannabe tough guy. He used to be like pretty badass. He didn't really give a shit about what anybody said. Eventually, you know, by the time high school, that changed, and he was super nice, super awesome guy, but he always, in our like tech class, he actually bullied me, which is kind of an asshole. So I think it was kind of like a self-esteem issue more than anything, and eventually he got more comfortable in high school, and I kind of had like that preconceived, like I judged him and stuff like that, rightfully so. I mean, he was just like a dick to me for no reason. But eventually, you know, he became one of my best friends, Leo, so eventually, you know, we didn't think it was a big deal that he wasn't hanging out with us too much, but eventually we figured out, you know, he'd kind of, and I feel weird saying this, but he kind of turned on us to kind of get back in the good graces of the Dick Hawkins gang, and he had a lot of issues. First off, I think he just kind of, he even outright stated, we play Smash too much, because at that point we had been playing Smash pretty much non-stop for like, probably like 4 months at that point. So that was a valid complaint. I understand 100% why he felt the way he felt on that. You know, we're not mixing things up. We're not doing anything new or fresh. That's fine, but he didn't really communicate it to us until after, you know, things started to kind of change and he kind of started distancing himself. That said, though, there was also, I think there was definitely a heavy influence from the Dick Hawkins gang, which, if you remember earlier in, you know, in my dialogue, they were kind of the ones who also didn't have any sort of communication with us. And I'm sure they were getting a little sick of Smash 2, even though we had played it for so long and stuff like that, even before, you know, we used to play Dick Hawkins modded Wii and Wii U to where like he had like all the mods and stuff like that for Smash Ultimate. Like, I forget who it was, but like he changed, he changed Wario into Mr. Krabs, and it's weird how perfect, especially with the walking cycle and running cycle, that worked out for him. I think like Thomas the Train was like a character he added in, and Ned Flanders and stuff like that. You get the idea. We were playing it for a long time before we even got Smash Ultimate, so I think that was something that, you know, the Dick Hawkins gangs, though, I think that was something where they were once again trying to create that divide for no reason, you know, between me and Leo and, you know, the Raquel guys and stuff like that. For, you know, I don't know if it was jealousy, if it was just, they kind of started to not like us, so they wanted to just kind of create an artificial drama. And I also contributed to it because I didn't have, even to this day, I don't have conversational skills, honestly, but I would kind of, as conversation pieces, you know, I didn't like it when it was like awkward and silent. I would kind of tell both sides, you know, Dick Hawkins and Raquel, when like they said something about each other, and it wasn't like to spread drama or anything like that. It was just I was an idiot, a massive idiot that couldn't, you know, really communicate or feel comfortable in those, you know, silences, or just chill, as they say, you know, just chill on our phones or something like that. I always needed to have something to say, and because of that I definitely contributed heavily to the decline, unfortunately, because I was saying things that shouldn't have been said and didn't need to be said at also. So eventually they did talk to each other and like, oh, so I guess all this stuff was a misunderstanding, and, you know, being a Mac was just kind of being an idiot with things and stuff like that and saying things that didn't need to be said. Once again, we kind of patched things up, but we still didn't see as much from Leo, and we tried to kind of mix things up and play other games, go back to Mario Party, try new games like WarioWare Inc. and with him and Raquel. Raquel ended up hating WarioWare Inc. Eventually he would end up liking it, but it took him a while because he was like, what? Mini games? These aren't mini games. And I was like, yeah, you're right, they're micro games. He's like, what's the point if they're 5 seconds? So, you know, there was a lot of issues there with WarioWare Inc., but he eventually grew to love it. And, you know, we experimented with, you know, other classic GameCube games and, you know, Nintendo games, 64 games. Like, I think we eventually tried Conker's Bad Fur Day that I loved as a kid, and, you know, once again, Raquel was not a big fan of, but, you know, there's a lot of experimentation is the point I'm trying to make, and, you know, Leo was still kind of distancing himself, and I think a big part is we eventually found out he started kind of doing a lot of, I wouldn't say exactly hardcore, but a lot of dangerous drugs. And because of that, he was actually, you know, distancing himself from the Dick Hawkins gang, because we were all pretty anti-drug. And, you know, I think he knew that, because, like, he used to have a cigarette smoking problem when he was, like, growing up, and, you know, we kind of just essentially bullied him out of doing that. Which, you know, hey, that's a good kind of bullying when you really think about it, you know. High schoolers and middle schoolers shouldn't be smoking cigarettes, and we believe he quit completely because, you know, honestly, we never seen him smoke or anything like that, and I think he's probably still quit to this day. I don't know if he got back into it, but, like, now he's into more hardcore stuff, you know, and I think because of that, he didn't want to be bullied out of it, so he just essentially stopped hanging out with both groups as much, but he would feel comfortable playing online with the Dick Hawkins gang, and of course with them there, it just kept getting more and more into that whole, you know, see we're your buddies, they're not, yada yada kind of nonsense, dividing the group further, and eventually, after high school, which is kind of too much, and we eventually just kind of stopped hanging out as much, and kind of like, eventually we just moved on, you know, kind of deal, and, you know, it was just me, it was Raquel, we had the clan, So it was just us three, you know, and after high school ends, of course, you know, you have those big groups that you hang out with, and then everybody kind of goes into their own, you know, area, because there's just not the same amount of time, you know, in your life to devote to, you know, buddies. You know, obviously, you know, you can skip homework and not do anything important with school and not really care and do what you want in your free time after school, but obviously with jobs, you know, you get more responsibility, bills. People were going off to college. You know, my brother, you know, went to, you know, Topher. He went to college and stuff like that. So that was for the first time in my life where it was kind of like weird to not have him around all the time if I wanted to hang out and stuff like that. And he was also, you know, I'm just gonna outright say it, he was pretty girl crazy at the time, you know. So he was kind of going through that kind of phase in college and stuff, and so he didn't always have as much time for us. He just kind of maybe stopped by and for, you know, with a girl around his arm and just hang out for like 10 minutes or something like that, seeing what we were doing. And he was also, you know, even though he was excited for the Switch, he also kind of got to the point where he was sick of Smash. And I think also he used to be like, when I was growing up, he was the undisputed best. He almost won every single game, you know, because he was the big brother. And if I did win a game, it was, you know, every excuse in the book as to why I didn't. It was just because of the items, it's because you were spamming the same move, yada yada, you know, he would make any sort of excuse. And so when it came to Ultimate, you know, like obviously he skipped pretty much, you know, Smash for Wii U and 3DS, so I eventually got better as I, you know, through the game, and, you know, he was no longer the head guy. And even our little brother, you know, Super Lou 64, he eventually started playing the game. He got really good at it. He's probably better than me at this point as well, even though he's like way younger than us. But you know, eventually he got better than most of us. And, you know, I think even though he won't say it, I do think a big part of it, of why my brother Topher kind of left the scene and stuff like that, other than the odd tournament here and there to bring everybody together, because he's really big into, you know, having big meetups and hangouts and stuff like that, especially at this point in his life. I think it was just because he wasn't the top dog anymore. You know, the torch has been passed at this point, I have to say. And he did bring a lot of his college buddies in, though, that was really cool. The biggest one I would have to say was his buddy Jor. And it was just like, it was really cool, you know. We were experiencing the peak of everything. We had like 3 gangs, which was, you know, the Dick Calkins gang, the Raquel guys, and then the Topher boys, I guess we'll go with, you know, my brother. You know, we had like 20-man tournaments, and it was just really awesome. And it felt like I was almost at the forefront of it all, because I was the only one that was connected to all 3 groups. It was always at my house when we had these crazy tournaments. And it was just always super nice to have all this stuff going around, and it really felt like the peak of the Switch. And like, this was kind of like what I was saying, you know. I think like people say they have a fear of it. I don't really have a fear, and I don't really have this feeling of like everything's gonna suck now and yada yada. I look at it as like, hey, I like to look at things in the past, leave things in the past, and create new chapters and stuff like that. So for me, it's kind of like, you know, it's a nice period of time that I can look back on. But it really is kind of one of those things like, was I living at the peak of my life at that time and I just didn't know it? And, you know, obviously things are different nowadays, but it was just so awesome having all those three groups and stuff like that all intermingling and being, you know, cordial with each other. And, you know, eventually, like I said, you know, the Dick Calkins gang, we would eventually just split up from them after high school. And, you know, because we were just kind of sick of the immaturity from their side. I was getting out of the phase of where, you know, like saying the stupidest, edgiest stuff was funny to me. And I still have a terribly immature sense of humor, but, you know, I just, like I say, the stupidest stuff, you know, and it's not like offensive, it's just downright stupid to make myself and my buddies laugh. And, you know, as well as, you know, you know, depreciating humor and all that sort of stuff. But, you know, I was kind of like, I just grew out of that phase, and I was ready to move on to the next phase of my life, which was working and planning on what I was going to do next in life. that whole ordeal, and what was it that I was gonna do, you know, as a big career and stuff, and I still haven't figured that out, honestly. But you know, that was kind of my mindset at the time. You know, I had fun with these guys. It was a blast. You know, I did a lot of stupid stuff, but it was, you know, we were kids, and we didn't beat anybody up or anything crazy like that, or destroy too much property, but you know, we just kind of like harassed, you know, adults and just rebelled against the man, you know, kind of stupid stuff like that. And I was just kind of past that point in my life. And so, you know, that's when like the end of the Dick Hawkins group came, and you know, I still like hung out with them periodically, and then I would, you know, there was like a very brief period of time where we played Minecraft together online, and that was when Among Us first came out, and we played that, and that was pretty cool and fun. But other than like very, very short bursts of like playing online, you know, we didn't really hang out too much. And really the only reason I kind of came back at it is because my buddy who I worked with at Arby's, Jay, you know, he kept like convincing me like, okay, you know, come on, we missed you, get back into it, Beano Mac, you know, we want to see you online and stuff like that. And you know, it was cool, but you know, at that point it was just, you know, even Leo came back to play online and stuff like that, and that was really cool. But it just kind of got to the point where I was just sick of it. And I think the biggest thing that divided the group, and this is going to be a pretty controversial thing here, was if you can't tell by his name, Raquel was black, and obviously we were all super edgy. I think you might be able to see where this is going. So Raquel, there was the Dick Hawkins gang, and then there was in that gang there was a guy named Juan, and he was black too. He didn't really like black people because, you know, yeah, he was like an Uncle Tom, right? So, you know, I guess his dad abandoned him when he was a kid. He never knew his dad, and somehow I think associating with that is he also just didn't really like black people. He even said it himself. He liked just saying the N-word just so people can, like, you know, turn around like, who said that? Whoa, gonna kick your ass, yada yada. And he was like, oh, that was me. And then they would be like, oh, all right, never mind. You know, just to kind of like piss people off. But, you know, Raquel, you know, even though he thought it was stupid, he was fine with it, you know, when Juan said it and stuff like that. But, once again, like I mentioned earlier, you know, like Dick Hawkins and their gang kept saying, oh, we were all butt buddies, you know. And even though Dick Hawkins and Juan were kind of free from, like, the inside jokes and being made fun of, like the rest of us, they felt like, oh, you know, like me and Leo, we didn't have any balls to say or do, you know, the things we wanted to say and yada yada. Or, you know, we didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings or anything like that. And yeah, I mean, I think even at that time, I do think that there was a line that shouldn't have been crossed. And what they wanted me to do, and it was for two things. They wanted to put me in a very uncomfortable position so they could laugh at me, trying to get me to say the N-word to Raquel. And at the same time, they knew how much it bothered Raquel. So eventually, you know, I'm sorry to say that eventually I did cave in. And, you know, like I said it, and Raquel got pissed off, and all this other stuff, and he's like, what, say it louder, 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 and, you know, I was peer pressure, so I kept saying it louder, and eventually he was like, dude, what are you doing? Don't do this stuff, and he, you know, stormed off. We were at a restaurant at the time, too, when we were doing this, and, you know, he stormed off, and, you know, eventually, you know, I felt like I was very in the middle of that stuff, and, you know, which is a very uncomfortable experience. And eventually, you know, me and Raquel talked, we patched things up pretty quickly, but it was kind of at that point where we knew, like, okay, these guys, they don't even really want to hang around us that much. You know, they want to make, I won't even say make fun of us, but it's just kind of like a thing of like, okay, they see us as outsiders at this point. They just want to make us uncomfortable. They, you know, wanted to make Raquel upset specifically because, you know, they thought it was funny. They wanted to, you know, make me uncomfortable with the whole situation because me and Raquel were best friends. So, you know, we patched things up. I've never said the word since then. I know that there's a lot of people, and I'm not trying to defend it, but I know there's a lot of people that would hold it back for me, hold it against me, I should say. You know, I said it, and once again, I'm not excusing it, but I can also acknowledge that, you know, I was a teenager and I shouldn't have said it, but I'm trying to move on from it. Whereas I think, you know, honestly, there's people that are just like, ah, nah, you're a terrible person for the rest of your life, but still trying to make amends for it and that whole ordeal and stuff. So I do feel bad about that, and I still feel bad. You know, Ray Kelly doesn't really give a crap about it anymore. He understands the whole situation, and even, I guess, I haven't seen any, they haven't messaged me or anything like that, and I doubt they ever will. But apparently it was like a few months ago, Leo and Dick Hawkins eventually messaged Raquel again and said, hey man, look, we're sorry, we were immature. It was actually Juan who kind of goaded us into saying this stuff and being immature, and we've grown up a lot, and nothing really came of that. They just kind of wanted to send out an apology to Raquel, and Raquel, you know, because of all the stuff we've gotten in the past, he was very uncomfortable with giving them the benefit of the doubt, which makes perfect sense after the things I just described. But he's like, hey, you know, whatever, we're cool. You know, and we haven't talked to him since, and, you know, it's kind of, to me, like, obviously they were apologizing to him for that specific situation, but I am a little, I'll be honest, a little bitter, I guess, for not getting an apology myself, because it's like, hey, you put me in this situation, and at the same time, though, I do have to take pretty much 100% accountability for my role in that as well, for not sticking up for myself and saying I'm not doing it and sticking to my guns, because they tried to get me to do it for the longest time, and eventually I caved in due to peer pressure. And at the same time, though, like, I knew what was right from wrong, so I can keep saying peer pressure, this or that, but, like, I knew I shouldn't have said that, you know, that word, and you know, I did, so I got to take accountability for that. But I also do remember, like, hey, you know, thinking, like, why is it seemed like they wanted to kind of talk and hang out together again and stuff like that, so I did feel a little sour knowing that, like, they didn't try and contact me to hang out with, you know, Leo and Dick Hawkins again and just kind of catch up and stuff. But it is what it is. But eventually, you know, like I said, the groups, I don't know, I'd say around 2020, 2021, eventually the groups kind of split off, and it was just me, Raquel, and the clan. Eventually I started working at Arby's, and, you know, coincidentally, we made a new buddy. His name was the guy we're referring to as the Fresh Prince. I met him at Arby's, and it turns out, you know, like, he liked my sense of humor, you know, which was, you know, more goofy rather than edgy or anything stupid like that. You know, we played the same games, so he was like, hey, you want to hang out? And me and Raquel already had experience of, like, people asking us to hang out, and it's kind of like, oh man, you know, hey, let's hang out sometime. But it's like, you know, don't message them. It's just the thing you say, right? So, like, I even talked to Raquel about it. I was like, hey, you know, the Fresh Prince said this. He was like, oh, dude, they're probably just saying that just to say it. I'm like, yeah, you're right. Then next thing I know, you know, the next time was like a week later. It's like, hey, man, you know, we should hang out. The Fresh Prince asked again, like, we should hang out. So I was like, oh, all right, well, free this day, and, you know, it's pretty cool. He became, you know, a core part of our friends group. We got that fourth in our group once again, you know, so we could do the Mario parties again. We could, you know, play Smash again. The only issue was the clan went off to the military, and really bad timing, unfortunately, and, you know, so it was once again a three-man group. And, you know, we still played Smash, and we still played Mario Party, and we did a new thing where we would watch animes together, and, you know, we watched Cowboy Bebop, Samurai Champloo, and, Parasites. We watched Sword Art Online, and, you know, the Fresh Prince picked that particularly because he said that, you know, it was like the worst anime ever, and I kind of agree, you know. I mean, I'm sure there might be some Sword Art Online fans, and I think it got better as the series went on, but it is kind of one of those shows where I'm like, man, how did this get so popular? But, I mean, I think that's just kind of like a few people would think that about, like, Dragon Ball Z and, like, other shows that I love, so it is what it is. But eventually, you know, we branched out to other shows. We did other things. It was nice to just be able, because people started getting cars. We were able to go to the mall without having to plan this big, massive trip. And since it was just the three of us, it wasn't this massive, like, you ask people and they're like, oh, I don't know, I'll think about it when the day comes, or, oh, I mean, what are we doing? Asking stupid questions. And it just things get complicated when you have like 10 plus people going to a big event and stuff like that. And, it was just a lot of fun, the three of us just kind of messing around, and it felt like we were in a new era. Me, Raquel, and the Fresh Prince, and then, the clan would occasionally come back and, from the military, and, hang out once or twice a week. And it was really nice because even the clan, he was really into Smash, but he was never a big gamer, and he was kind of like phasing out of that stuff. And, the thing is like me and the clan, he was a very extroverted person, so he was able to always tell us what he was thinking, his feelings, on a lot of particular topics. He's always able to keep the conversation going, even though I still have like zero conversation skills. But it was always cool because the thing that kept us together, if it was one-on-one, or, in a group and stuff like that, was he was always willing to share all his crazy new ideas, like he wanted to be a stand-up comic, he was flirting with that idea for a while. He wanted to write a book. And, about like, kind of like a similar 1984 thing, kind of deal. And, I think he had like a Native American guy whose name was like Logan or something like that was his character. It's just like the starting ideas of it, nothing serious at the time. But either way, he always seemed like he had some crazy, cool, funny, awesome, or like great scam or something like that. Like he even at one point tried talking us into like doing a charity scam. Like, hey, we only have to put this percentage into a thing, into like the actual thing we're promising, and then we can keep the rest for ourselves. And we were like, dude, what the hell are you talking about? Like, that's just a really piece of shit thing to do. But he was all about hustle culture, and eventually got into red pill theory. And yeah, I think you can see where this is going. Eventually the clan, also I think due to the experiences he had during the military stuff, during the COVID period, and I think it was just that kind of pushed him over the edge. And he eventually went from like a very free-thinking, cool guy that was outside the box with his ideas and was always funny and just in a quirky way, to eventually he just got paranoid about everything. After getting COVID, he swore that like he just couldn't breathe the same and couldn't work out anymore. I don't know if it was true. I can't really speak to him. I wasn't him, obviously, but eventually now he's working out fine. He's doing his own thing, and he loves, even though he's an outdoorsy guy who loves, going for walks in the park and cooking and, like planting and stuff like that, gardening and stuff. It was always really cool because even if we had differences, it was nice to just kind of come together, and we could, he could tell me all the stuff that he was doing, and we could hang out playing games while we were doing it. But he kept pushing the idea that he couldn't play video games anymore, and we even got big into Dead by Daylight. And he was super big into that, and that was something we all really bonded on. But he just kept forcing. It wasn't that like he was outgrowing games. It was just the idea of like, I can't play this anymore. The clan was thinking. He just kept. The clan just kept thinking, man, I shouldn't be playing video games because I should be getting girls. And I don't think his dad helped with that stuff because, the 80s were a different time. And, his dad kept saying like, oh, well, when I was your age, all I would have to do is just, see a girl on the weekend, maybe call him once to set up plans, and that's all we did. You kids are doing too much with texting every day. You kids, you should be out there sleeping with as many girls as you can, and all this other stuff, thinking that was kind of the only purpose to life. And I think his dad really kind of put that idea into him, and probably also put the idea of like playing video games is wrong and all that sort of stuff. So it was just a very tough situation, and eventually the clan purposely started distancing himself to us as much as he could, even though he had like fun with us every time. Like, it was clear he was having fun with us every time. He'd say, oh, well, I'm getting off the game, at 12, and then 3 or 4 hours later, we were still playing Dead by Daylight. So he was having fun. It wasn't like we were forcing him to keep playing or anything like that. He was enjoying what he was doing, but he was still, once again, had that mindset he was fighting. Like, I can't be playing games with these guys. These guys aren't, you know, hustling in life and trying to get rich quick. These guys aren't trying to, you know, get as many chicks as they want or anything like that. And eventually, you know, he did split off, and he also got real big into politics. And when you get super invested into politics, I don't care if you're right or left, it's just not good. You know, it consumes your life. You get paranoid about how the world is working, no matter who's in charge and anything like that. And he was very worried about the woke stuff, and anything and everything became woke. And it paranoid him. He thought that, like, the world hated, you know, white guys. He thought that, you know, we were gonna, you know, the fat acceptance movement was, you know, like this movement, you know, that was just gonna eradicate the white male and all this other crazy stuff. And he said he was never going to accept fat people for being fat. He was a crazy guy, like I said, and he was always really paranoid and worried about that stuff at that point. And, like, it would be crazy because I'd never seen it in anybody before. Like I said, he used to be a calm guy, and he was like, you know, he was always a right-wing guy, but he was calm. He wanted to debate with people, share ideas. He wanted to learn from things, and eventually at this point, he had gotten so paranoid, he was, you know, doing that stereotypical thing. He was blocking people that didn't share his opinions. He had a lot of other friends group that he was with, you know, they hung out with consistently, and he blocked them off entirely because, you know, they were playing games, or they didn't believe in the exact same stuff that he believed in, and he was convinced that, like, he created this idea in his head that, like, me, you know, Raquel, the Fresh Prince, we were all like these super left-leaning people because we didn't agree with everything he said. And, you know, it consumed him. You know, we'd be talking about a game, and then all of a sudden somehow it turned into, you know, a discussion about transgenders or fat acceptance or wokeness in movies and Hollywood. You know, and he was always out of breath. He was clearly in a state of, you know, uncomfortableness, paranoia, you know, anxiety is what I mean to say. He was clearly in this very high anxiety state whenever he was talking. You know, he was, you know, talking, you know, like really fast, and then you would hear every single breath, you know, between each sentences, and, you know, it just wasn't good for him. We talked to him like 3 or 4 times, and, like, in person, he was cool. You know, it seemed like everything was fine, but then after the conversation, he would call Raquel and say, hey, you guys can't be saying this. You can't be thinking about me in this way, you know. And we just had genuine concern for him. And I didn't really hold too much back. I was like, hey, man, you're really coming across as crazy at this point, you know. Like, you're not the guy you used to be. We want to help you. Like, we're worried about you. And, you know, it seemed like he was cool at the time, but then he would message us about the same crazy stuff over and over and over and over and over again. And, you know, we kept trying over, you know, a period of multiple years, just saying, hey, let's not talk about this. Let's just hang out anyway. And there were times where he would hang out and we have a good time and stuff still. But then out when it was just like across the phone, it was like he was a different dude. So eventually he was the one that just said, screw it. I can't hang out with you guys. We had one big final conversation with the idea of, like, all right, let's just end on good terms. But, like, at least me and him had the idea of, like, we gotta say whatever we gotta say to each other. But we're probably, you know, never gonna hang out with each other again. And it seemed like we ended up on good terms, but, like, Raquel and the Clam, unfortunately, you know, like, Raquel wanted to keep hanging out, and, you know, eventually he started a family and stuff like that with a girlfriend, and, you know, he wanted the Clam to be a part of that, you know, to hang out and stuff, because, you know, Raquel still made a big thing, you know, hanging out with all our friends and stuff, instead of just kind of giving it up and saying, well, I got a family now, I don't have to do this anymore, you know. So that's, you know, why a big part of why I'm, you know, still best friends with Raquel this day. You know, he's one of those rare people in life that's just a genuine good guy that, you know, actually cares about you, and it's never going to be like a thing where, like, something stupid's going to happen where, like, alright, we can't hang out with each other, you know? At least me and him together personally. And it's just unfortunate that the clan felt like he needed to completely separate us because A, we didn't always have the same ideas as him. And it's like, you know, I think that's the best part of life. Sharing different ideas, getting different perspectives on things, and, you know, you don't always agree with each other. That's just how it is. Life would be boring if we all had the same ideas, thoughts, and opinions, even though it does feel good when you say something to somebody and like they share the same sentiments as you. I get that, but I just feel like it kind of got a little too ridiculous with the clan stuff. And like I said, we would talk, say, hey, we aren't really left leaning, you know. We never said that. We never said this about you. Where are you coming out of this stuff with, like, were you thinking we're like this left leaning woke crowd? And then we talked and it was like, oh yeah, I guess you guys are right. I don't really know why I was thinking that, and all this other stuff. And then eventually, like I said, it would just become to the point where, you know, he just convinced himself once again that, you know, like, you know, he was right and these crazy thoughts in his head were, you know, the truth of it all. And right around that time also was the time where my brother Topher finally graduated from college, so we got to see him a little bit. But at the same time, you know, he had a girlfriend and they split up a little bit for a while, and then he was, I guess, you know, girl crazy again, you know, just having fun and stuff like that in life. So we didn't really get to hang out with him still, and we even hung out with him less than when, like, he brought his college friends and stuff like that. He would just kind of pop in for 10 minutes with a girl and see what we're doing. Like, hey, you want to play the game, Topher? Nah, guys, I'm just here to see what you're doing real quick, and not really say anything and just kind of move on. And it was just kind of sad. But he's, like I say, he's, you know, he's married at this point. You know, he's got a really good girlfriend. You know, he's benefiting from his college degree. You know, they both went to college. They were both doing really good in life, and they got 2 kids. So I can't be more proud of my brother in that respect. And now at this point, you know, the Fresh Prince, and I didn't even mention him. I guess he just wasn't important enough yet. But, you know, eventually his old high school friend, I'm going to refer to as Crack. And, you know, eventually he came into the group, and the Fresh Prince, you know, he started to split off because he got, like, a girlfriend. And, you know, Crack eventually got a girlfriend. And unfortunately, really cool guys, but unfortunately, they're kind of those guys where once they get girlfriends, that's all they want to be invested in. So, you know, the Fresh Prince, he's just busy at this point in life. He's got a girlfriend that he's got to keep happy. He's got, you know, he's just finished college, I believe, and at the same time, you know, he was going to college for the longest time. You know, he's just got a new apartment or house or something like that. And he has, you know, other personal stuff with his family, you know, like his brother and all that sort of stuff I'm sure he had to deal with, and, you know, spending time with them. So, you know, eventually he just kind of split off, and there would just be like a headache for Raquel, who was always the guy who set up the, you know, the groups and stuff like that to hang out with and whatnot. You know, eventually it just kept going like, oh, I can't hang out this day. You know, Fresh Prince just kept saying, oh, I can't hang out this day. I can't hang out this day. Or I'm hanging out with my girlfriend that day. Or, you know, he kept saying like, you know, hey, we're going to plan this huge game night. You know, a month in advance. Just ask for work, you know, ask your job to get this day off. And, you know, there was, of course, you know, it was like 10 people in that group, and they just all said, oh, well, we'll be there if we have the day off. And it's like, no, ask for the day off, please. So it's kind of like they just kind of, it was always insulting to me because it was kind of their way of saying, if I don't have anything else to do that day, sure, we'll hang out with you. We'll do your little game night and stuff like that. Showing that they weren't really invested in, you know, hanging out as much, you know, that we did back in the day. And, like, it wasn't an issue that, you know, they had a, you know, Fresh Prince and Crack had girlfriends or anything like that, you know, who cares, you know? Bring your girlfriends along. It doesn't have to be a guy's night, you know, it's game night, you know? We had a bunch of other people that, honestly, are just not really important to the story that was involved in it. But, you know, Raquel was kind of the head of the group in charge of, like, getting all these people there, and it was just like a headache for him for some reason. It should be as simple as, like, hey, can you hang out this day? Sure. That's it. You know, and, like, if they can't, you know, we just figure out what day is best for everybody else type deal. You know, it was just a constant. I wasn't even involved in the plans, but, like, just every time Raquel kept telling me about it, I was like, dude, all right, this is crazy, you know. I kept telling him, like, hey, these people, I just think that's their way of saying they don't want to hang out. And he's like, well, no, I mean, they said they would come. It's just, you know, whether or not they're busy on this day. And I think to a degree he eventually got it. And that's not to say even like the Fresh Prince or Crack don't want to hang out. It's just, once again, it's when it's convenient for them. You know, and it doesn't have to be this huge thing where it's like, all right, you know, we gotta hang out on these days when it's this or that. It's kind of just like when they got the feeling to want to hang out, you know what I mean? Rather than making the effort to kind of stay in contact and stuff, you know. It was them who, I mean, it was Raquel who stayed in contact with them, not the opposite way around. If Raquel was not involved, who knows where they'd be at this point, you know, in the friends group. And, you know, I moved away from all that stuff, so, I mean, I'm not even a part of that friends group anymore. Like, even when I come down to visit, I don't even make an effort to hang out with them because I don't feel like dealing with the nonsense or anything like that. And the truth be told, me and Raquel are probably I'm a very introverted person, so he's probably the only person I can have any real genuine conversations with anymore, especially since the clan, you know, left our friends group. You know, I'd even say abandoned, you know, deserted us. So, like, me, even though the Fresh Prince, you know, he liked my sense of humor and, you know, we got together along well at work, it just felt really awkward when Raquel would leave and we'd watch a TV show or we'd play a game. It was awkward, you know, nothing was being said too much, and, you know, all the passion of him talking about anime with Raquel, you know, the Fresh Prince just didn't have that same passion for me, and it's not his fault, I'm just a really terrible conversationalist. And it was kind of the same thing with Crack. You know, we were into a lot of the same stuff. We were into Mortal Kombat. We were into other things, but it was just kind of like a extremely awkward thing. And whenever I'd kind of get into the conversation, I don't know, it just didn't seem like they were too invested in it. So, you know, it's just, we had a really tough time connecting one-on-one. So, considering I feel like I'm always the outlier on that, I'll say that, yeah, I'll just chalk that up to me, that it was my fault that we weren't really connecting and not theirs. You know what I mean? But I do think I just need like a really extroverted person to kind of, you know, get into that stuff. And also, I don't really do too much outside of playing video games, so I understand, you know, people, it being difficult to be able to get into a conversation with a guy who doesn't really do much. So it is what it is. But, you know, that said, I still, you know, whenever I can, we have like siblings dinner, you know, me and my brothers. Got 4 of them, so it's like 5 of us, and, you know, we just recently went on a vacation in New York. It all happened at the right time. You know, my brother Topher, he's living down south. I'm living mid-south, and mid-south. Yeah, mid-south, actually. I'm crazy. Topher is living in the south. I'm living, like, you know, I'd say mid-east. And then... No, so Topher's living south. I'm sorry, I just keep getting stuck on this point. Topher's living mid-south. I'm living midwest. And, you know, everybody else is up north. So, you know, we don't get to see each other too often. Like, we get, me and Raquel and my little brothers, we still play some games every now and then. You know, like Mario Party Jamboree and stuff. That's actually the game I uploaded on my main channel, Beano Mac. Didn't get too many views, but honestly, I haven't uploaded anything like that in a long time, so, like, I didn't expect it to get very many views at all. And, you know, I even, like, didn't think, you know, like, to do any voice lines there, because I didn't have, like, the microphone for that, and, like, we were just playing, you know, off phone calls and stuff like that. And I guess I even asked Raquel on this latest trip, like, hey, you know, like, I'm assuming you guys wouldn't want to really do any commentary on, like, Mario Party or whatever, and he seemed into the idea, so maybe in the future, you know, we'll do a Mario Party and we'll all say our stupid jokes and stuff like that, and hopefully crack you guys up and stuff. A lot of gay jokes, I'll just be honest with you, you know. I'm a kind of a different guy on this stuff than I am, and, you know, when I'm just, you know, with my buddies type deal. And it's not like we're saying the same stupid edgy stuff, we just kind of make gay jokes to each other, you know. That's just our sense of immature humor, you know. But that's kind of, I think, the majority of, like, the stories, you know, of my friends group. Like I said, this was kind of like a video I made for myself, this part 1, of just me kind of, like, hopefully one day I can look back on this stuff and, you know, now that I have my thoughts gathered, you know, I have, like, a memory, you know, memories are, I guess, archived or something like that. I can't really think of the proper term I'm thinking of, but, you know, I feel myself forgetting things more and more often every day, and I just kind of, you know, don't want to forget everything in my life, you know, by the time I'm 60. You know, I struggle to remember everyday things. So, you know, I go to the, I'm that guy that constantly goes to the refrigerator consistently and opens it and I was like, what am I doing here? You know, type deal. And it turned out I wasn't trying to get anything to eat. I was trying to get the broom to sweep my floor, and, you know, I didn't remember it until I got back, type deal. So, I don't know, maybe you guys learned a little something about me. Maybe, you know, you have a deeper connection. Maybe I, you know, talked about some things you guys can connect with on a personal level and, you know, have similar experiences and stuff like that. And I would love to hear you guys' personal experiences on when you were growing up, what your friends group was. You know, did you play games with your brothers? How was your brothers', you know, relationship nowadays? I'd say I have a really great relationship with all my brothers, which wasn't always the case, you know, even just a few years ago. And, you know, truth be told, I'm really proud of all my brothers and stuff like that, because they've all come a long way, and, you know, they're all moving up in life, and, you know, one of them's still in school and stuff like that, but he's a very smart kid, you know, Subaru 64. So, you know, I'm looking, you know, just as like a big brother looking down on his little brothers. You're always worried about that kind of stuff, of what they're going to do outside of school and all that sort of stuff. But, you know, my one brother, Alpha C, he's doing really good. You know, he's enjoying working at Dunkin' Donuts. He's working on getting his license. He's planning on what school he wants to go to for college. So he's you know, he's relaxing. He's enjoying life. He's, you know, taking it a little step at a time and understanding that, you know, it doesn't have to get right on it, but that, you know, he shouldn't be dawdling or procrastinating when it comes to this stuff either, I think. So, really proud of him in that respect. And, you know, to finish off, I guess my thing about the Switch, you know, I'll go on with the games, you know. It was once again something that brought us together, you know. Even me and Leo, we did the assist mode and Mario Odyssey, and that was cool. I think it was when I first even bought the game, I just did assist mode with him, you know, the closest thing to co-op, and then eventually I would go on after that and finish the game myself, and Odyssey was just a magical experience for me, you know. I loved, it also reminded me of Crash Tag Team Racing, which was a big thing for me at the time. I loved, you know, all the alternate outfits. I loved the freedom of exploring these big worlds and kind of doing what you wanted when you wanted and getting these things and finding secrets all over the place. Apparently, Donkey Kong Bonanza is kind of similar to Odyssey. A lot of people are saying, like, oh, it's like the sequel to Odyssey. It's not Mario, so I don't care what anybody says. It's not close enough. I'm not saying that it wouldn't be a good game or anything on its own, but no, I would kind of want, it doesn't even have to be Odyssey 2, but just kind of like a new 3D Mario type game on the Switch 2. And I don't even have the Switch 2. I'm not going to get it. I'm not a big fan of like its pricing, particularly with its games. Like, okay, $450 for the console, like, I don't really think it's the biggest deal. I know a lot of people are not a big fan of it. Like, the OLED was like $400 when it first came out. Why the hell would the Switch 2 not be more expensive than that? You know what I mean? That whole ordeal. So it's just, you know, I'm not a big fan of the pricing for the games. And at the end of the day, you know, there was this big hullabaloo about, you know, when it first came out, like, hey, we gotta boycott this. Capitalism wins. You know, they're not going to change the price because people are going to buy the games anyway, and it just is what it is. It's not going to go on sale at any point. It's probably going to get more expensive, but maybe at some point down the line I'm going to get a Switch 2. But I'm also thinking of like maybe a PS5 down the line because of Resident Evil Requiem that's going to be, you know, coming out at some point. And I guess it's only PS5 exclusive for some reason, despite the fact that it literally looks like it's the exact same engine as like, you know, Resident Evil 4 Remake and Resident Evil 2 Remake, Resident Evil 7, that whole ordeal. So, I don't know, like, I might try that just because, you know, the main character is like the daughter of like Alyssa Ashcroft, who was like a character you played as in Resident Evil Outbreak, which is my favorite Resident Evil games, and I don't know, apparently, you know, Alyssa Ashcroft, she died after the Outbreak games, and I've always been curious about what happened to the Outbreak characters. I hope it's nothing stupid, like, you know, like the Grace, I think her name is, like, she finds out there was like some conspiracy with Umbrella, and there's like some list that says that all the Outbreak characters were killed off because, you know, like they were survivors, something like that. You know, I'm cool if it's just like Alyssa, but you know, that has the intrigue for me in that game, you know. And there's also an interesting thing where, like, you know, most Resident Evil protagonists, they're like, you know, tough and can handle situations, where Grace, I guess, is very shy and, I guess, for lack of a better term, a sissy. But she's also works for the Secret Service or something like that, or the government, so like obviously there's that capability there. So we'll just see what happens, you know. I'm not sure if I'm willing to get a PS4 or anything like that, because it's still super expensive, and we're gonna probably come to you know, PS6 PS6 at some point. Who knows, maybe we'll even go straight to the PS8, you know, so intense it skips over the other two. But you know, we'll just see. You know, I don't have too much of an interest in modern games. Tekken 8 would be another reason for the PS2, but the thing with me as to why I don't think I'm really too interested in a modern console is because the Switch was so magical at first, but I found out quickly there were a lot of games that were hyped up to me that didn't really live up to the hype. Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. It's okay, but you know, it's just a 2D Mario game. I'm not really into that. Mario Maker 2 was awesome at first, but then eventually people stopped. You know, I made all the boards I wanted, and I'm going to share those eventually with you at some point on the channel, all the stupid, trippy boards I made. But, you know, eventually, you know, we played it. You know, I like the story mode, but we played it, and we just kind of got sick of it real quick. You know, Minecraft, I played it on the systems, but it just doesn't work as a multiplayer experience on Switch, unfortunately. I think there's, you know, Breath of the Wild. It actually took me a really long time to get into it. It was like right before I moved to Nashville, Tennessee with my brother Topher that I finally got into it. And, you know, it was just kind of like too tough for me at first. I tried like 2 or 3 times. I couldn't get into it anyway. And the tutorial was just really annoying to me. But eventually I got past it. I got to the first area with, I think it was like Purah or something like that. Or no, it's not Purah, that's her sister. Can't think of who it would be. Impa. Impa it is. You know, Impa, and I think it's Paya was her granddaughter or something like that. You know, so we finally got going with the story and, you know, the shrines, and it was really fun. The shrines are awesome. The music in that is also one of the most awesome, you know, video game tracks you know, I've ever played. I haven't played Tears of the Kingdom yet, but there's just a lot of things where I'm not a big fan of modern gaming. You know, even with Switch 2, you need to pay like $20 for upgrades from Switch 1 to Switch 2 for certain games. It's like, come on, dude, really? You know, they know they're in control and they got us by the balls, and that's all video game companies. And you know, they even try blaming stuff on the tariffs, and like it's happening before the tariffs. Like they knew what they wanted to do before it, so the tariffs don't help. But like, no, they're trying to switch blame and stuff like that at the same time too, when they're really just kind of being anti-consumer because they know they can get away with it. And it's not something you see with every single console company. You know, once they get on top, you know, Wii was a big deal. Then they just were like, Nintendo got overconfident and thought, okay, well, the Wii U is good. You know, we don't have to worry about it. Bomb. Did terrible. So they're like, all right, well, we got to really be, you know, a man for the hardcore gamer, you know. So that's when the Switch came out. They learned their lesson. Switch 2, they don't even have to because, you know, people are enjoying it, you know. And I have no issue with, I'm not one of those people who are like, oh, you can't enjoy this console because I don't like it yet. I'm not like that or anything stupid like that, but you know, it does seem like the Switch 2, it just seems like there's a lack of games for me to want to buy at this point. The PS5, once again, lack of games, but you know, obviously like Sony, the PS3, it was too expensive. They eventually learned their lesson. After the PS2, you know, that was the greatest of all time, almost pretty much. Probably is my favorite of all time, but then the PS3, you know, they put it to be too expensive, and it wasn't until the end of the cycle where they learned the lesson. Then PS4 obviously did way better than Xbox, and I don't even know what the hell Xbox is doing at this point. Like, I don't even know what the consoles are. Like, they're the worst at naming their consoles, and everything is just. Apparently, they're even going to be like going out of the console game. People are saying. I don't know what the hell's going on with them, right? Like, I haven't flirted with Xbox since the Xbox One, and to be honest, I was just kind of disappointed it wasn't the Xbox 720. But I don't know, it's just one of those things. Even like through the Switch, there was a lot of, like, my brother hyped me up on indie games. I'm not really a big fan of indie games, but you know, there were a few cool ones I played. You know, I liked Undertale a lot. He didn't like it at all. We tried it because we're both, me and Topher are both big Paper Mario fans, the classic ones. I mean, honestly, I played 64 and 1000 Year Door on my channel. You know, so we weren't getting we still haven't gotten what we want out of the Paper Mario games. I mean, we got the remaster for 1000 Year Door, but it's not a brand new game. So, you know, there's a game called Bug Fables, which, you know, is very similar to it in style of the Paper Mario games. And he loves Bug Fables, you know, Topher, but me personally, I love the Paper Mario games not just for the combat, but because it was Mario, you know? Like, I love the crazy unique enemies they had, but I also love just seeing, you know, the Goombas, the Koopas, interacting with all the characters in, like, these areas that resemble, you know, the classic 2D levels, you know? Or the, you know, cool ones like the moon. So, you know, it needed to have that Mario charm for me. So Bug Fables, I really tried. I think I got to, like, the 3rd chapter, and I just... Man, I could not get into it, and I really wanted to. And, you know, I'm not really a big fan of Hollow Knight or anything like that. So, you know, there's a lot of games that, you know, I wanted to try that ended up kind of being disappointed. Mario 3D Land. Yeah, I think it's 3D Land. It's the one where it's like the Wii U big game. You know, they had Bowser's Fury as an add-on and stuff like that. And I just couldn't get into that either. That honestly pissed me off more than anything. I was just constantly frustrated with the multiplayer aspect. I just got extremely pissed off at one point playing with my friends, and it was just kind of like, we're playing it, but like, I just can't wait for this to be over. Tropical Freeze was something I played as well from the Wii U that came into the Switch, and it was pretty fun at first. But like with me and like super hard games, like once you're like really struggling and you're on the same level for the longest time, like it just gets irritating. You know, that's kind of what happened with me and Cuphead. Me and my buddy finally, you know, me and Raquel finally beat Cuphead, but it was like years because we got stuck on like Grim Matchstick, and then we got stuck on, I think it was King Dice, and then eventually we really got stuck on the Devil. And like we were also kind of false advertising. We were told like the Devil was not all that difficult compared to other enemies, and yeah, that was a load of horseshit. The detector determined that that was a lie. But we eventually beat it, and that game also, like, the issue is fun, but the big issue is eventually, you know, it gets so hard to a point where it's not even skill anymore. It's just kind of luck almost, it feels like, with the enemy patterns you have to deal with. You know, there are just times where you kind of think to yourself, man, there is zero I could have done to avoid getting hit in that situation. So it just was what it was, but we eventually beat it. And, you know, I have a lot of Switch memories, and, you know, Odyssey, the Mario parties were fantastic, especially Super Mario Party. And we're still playing Jamboree to this day online every now and then. And it's just, you know, it was a good time. You know, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was a fantastic game, and I love that they eventually kept updating it after a while. Then, of course, there was, jeez, I can't even think of what I was saying. Like the small little games, I'm sure. Oh yeah, Fire Emblem Three Houses. You know, like my buddy Ray Kelly got it for me for Christmas, and that was at the time where I was trying to reconnect with Radiant Dawn and Path of Radiance. I actually got my brother, you know, Path of Radiance for GameCube, and I actually played it before, you know, it was Christmas because I got it in advance. So I was like, all right, I gotta experience this myself. I don't even think he's played it yet, and it's been years. But then eventually I got my hands on Radiant Dawn again from my brother, Topher, and really I bought the game, but, you know, to this day, it's just, you know, it is what it is. So I let him keep the game. I'm not going to play it consistently anyway, and my buddy got me Three Houses, and that was like probably my favorite game of all time. But I'll probably talk more about that when I play Fire Emblem Three Houses. I don't know if I'll do a commentary on that or not, but, you know, big point is there's a lot of great, awesome Switch memories I had, and it's just one of those consoles that I'll never be able to fully experience again because it was just the perfect time in my life when I had so many friends throughout the years, so much hype that I'm probably never going to be able to live again, and you know, it just is what it is. I'm glad that I had those moments in my life, and I want to reflect on those, but at the same time, I am still pretty happy with life and ready to move on from it. So thank you guys so much for watching, though. If you enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe. Check out next week's episode on Nintendo Tuesday, but above all else, please remember to have a nice day.